I asked Caroline for an opportunity to address you as the senior management in Promac, to address you on an integrated model that we're currently working on with HR and with the training division under Caroline, to make sure that there are no gaps in the performance management system within the organization. The one thing I want to assure you of from the beginning is that whatever additional management responsibility may ensue from what I'm going to talk to you about has been taken into account from an administration point of view via Caroline's division, which is the Training and Transformation Division. And so the facilitation of most of what we're going to be talking about will either come from HR or alternatively from the Training and Transformation Division under Caroline. So we're talking about performance management, but the Promac way in terms of the model we are trying to identify and to operationalize. I want to start off by talking about what you are required as managers to have in your competency vault, and importantly, what you are required as managers to be instilling in the competency vault of the supervisors, the team leaders, and the first line managers who in fact would fall under you. Because if you have supervisors, team leaders, and first line managers, and every one of your departments should have that, you cannot be expected as the senior manager in a department, particularly where there are more than 10 or 20 people in your department, to also be responsible for the day-to-day management of every single person in that department. That, by the way, is not sound or good management practice. There should always be at least one, if not more, team leaders and supervisors, and in some instances, first-line managers reporting to you as a senior manager within your department. So the important things that I want you in that management vault to continually be aware of is this. We do not seem, in business generally, prepared to distinguish between issues of competency and issues of behavior. And I think it's critically important that I emphasize, guys, and Caroline, that when it comes to behavioral issues with your employees, there is absolutely there's no foundation, there's no basis, there's no justification, in fact, for you to be performance managing employees on anything to do with, in fact, behavioral issues. And I see Laura's just joined us. Laura, thank you so much. So what I mean by that is a behavioral issue is something upon which you employ a person for whatever level of job in the organization that has nothing to do with the company or the culture of the company, and everything to do with whether the individual is ready to be employed as an adult. Behavioral issues are things that should have been sorted out by parents, by teachers, by mentors, but not in the working environment. And I'll give you a typical example of a behavioral issue. Coming late to work, insubordination, anything to do with what could be required, bringing the company into disrepute, anything that can be linked to the values the individual might have that are expected to be societal values, are not things which require performance management. And I think it's critically important that if you haven't previously distinguished between competency issues, which do require performance management, and behavioral issues, which do not require performance management, and do not require 50 warnings before you move to discipline, and do not require final written warnings before you dismiss. The reality is that behavioral issues are things you expect from people is behavior that you expect from people when you employ them, not behavior you need to nurture in the working environment. You are not required to be the parent or the teacher of that individual when it comes to how they behave. And so we don't performance manage generally on behavioral issues. We performance manage on competency issues. The second point I want to make, and competency is how they do the job. And it's really very much about, and if you look at the second bullet point right at the bottom of the screen, it's very much about, have you discharged your managerial onus? Your managerial onus is to select on the basis of competency. Your managerial onus is to develop in terms of competencies which are work-related or job-related in a particular company. Your managerial onus is to performance appraise. Your managerial onus is to give feedback. Your managerial onus is to counsel where there is poor response to feedback in the performance appraisal process. Then your managerial onus is to move to discipline. And so the point is, when it comes to behavioral management, performance management around competency, the question is only ever legally going to be, have you discharged your managerial onus as a company and then as a manager to accommodate the individual? If training is indicated, have you trained? If ongoing continuous professional training is indicated, does that happen within your department or within the organization? The one thing I do want to implore upon you is, as you go through your management process with your employees, and in fact with your, let's call them junior managers in your divisions, so your supervisors and your team leaders and your first line managers, you should be trying to minimize a step ladder approach to discipline when it comes to competency and even when it comes to behavior. There is nothing in law that says that we have to have an unlimited number of warnings before we give a final written warning, and in fact, before we dismiss on a competency issue. So it's critically important that you understand that each component of the performance management system, and I'm going to be unpacking it in a little while, but that each component is in fact part of progressive discipline. And by the time you come to disciplining on competency, you should already have done most of the progressive discipline requirement for you to move directly into a consideration of dismissal if required and if necessary. So minimizing the step ladder approach to discipline is absolutely critical in how you go about managing your employees, because otherwise what tends to happen is a culture of permissibility, admissibility, and a culture, quite frankly, of manipulation grows up very quickly within a department and within an organization. The culture that says, if I come late to work, which is a behavioral problem, you're going to give me a warning and then another warning and then another warning, and maybe eventually you're going to take me into a discipline process and give me a final written warning, and maybe then on the 4th or the 5th or the 10th occasion you'll dismiss me. And that's a permissibility, that's a culture of permissibility, which very often is created by managers in an organization, not by the code of conduct in terms of anything put out by the HR department or in fact the industrial relations department. The functionality of a grading system is more important than a fancy label. And we'll unpack a little later what we mean by a grading system. But we are less interested in whether the grading system in the company is a Patterson one or a Peromnes one, or in fact is the customized one at South African breweries. We're less interested in the name of your grading system than we are in whether or not your grading system just does the job. And we'll talk about what that job is a little later. A job description is your only instrument as a manager. A job description for the employees under you is your only instrument directing your induction process, your performance appraisal processes, the measurability of performance, how you give feedback and what feedback is required, whether or not you need to include discussions around training, whether or not you can move to counseling, whether you've discharged the managerial onus I spoke about a little earlier, and whether you're entitled to progress to discipline and dismissal. So the job description is your controlling instrument in your department. It should be your only controlling instrument in your department. Job grading. So job grading distinguishes levels within an organization. And for example, a typical organization would have levels, bands, really, from A all the way through to F. So a cleaner would be on a band within, would be on the A band, whereas an executive director or a chief executive officer would be on an F band within the organization. However, some organizations do away with the F band and simply then have an A to E. And other organizations, smaller organizations, may only have an A to D. There's no right and wrong way. It is really about how you position jobs within bands and how many bands you're comfortable having within your organization to distinguish between the levels of those jobs. And in distinguishing between levels of those jobs, we distinguish responsibility, we distinguish job functions, we specify the appointment, education, and experience which may be required for you to appoint someone to that job. We specify the promotion, education, and experience you are going to require to either advance the direction of that individual or to promote the direction of that individual. Advancement happens on a horizontal basis, whereas promotion obviously happens on a vertical basis. But all of that should be specified in generalities in a grading system that you would have within your department, within your company, and within the group of companies within the Promac group. The sub-bands, the sub-levels within a band are critically important because those sub-levels say that there may be, so for example, one might have a mixer who works, just for argument's sake, with a 50 drum as opposed to a 100 drum as opposed to a 500 drum. And the 500 drum might require different equipment, different level of responsibility than a 50 drum may require. Ordinarily, you shouldn't have different sub-levels or in fact different bands for a job which has a range of application, but basically the same requirements in terms of expertise, education, responsibility, etc., etc. But it's really for you to decide how you're going to use job grading as a tool within your department in consultation with your discussions with HR around what the grades should look like within your department and how they should compare to other grades within other departments in the integrated grading system of the organization and of the group as a whole. Grades are not set in concrete. They are reevaluated every year, as well as the content of those grades are reevaluated every year. And they can obviously be amended, they can be changed. But, and this is the important thing, once you've established the grade and you've linked a job to the grade for someone within your department, any intention of changing content, band or sub-band, sub-level of that job grade requires a consultation process, not a negotiation process. There's a difference between negotiation and consultation. You still have the final authority as the manager of the department to do what you need to do, but it does require a consultation, excuse me, with your employees reporting to you, because please remember that any unilateral change to their conditions of employment are considered to be an unfair labor practice in terms of the Labor Relations Act. So once there is a contract in place linked to a job grade explanation and a job description, whenever and if ever you need or want to change anything in any of those control instruments, you are required to consult, not negotiate, but to consult to the extent that you've exhausted your obligation to explain your reasons, to listen to a response, should there be a response, and then to make a final educated decision. You can only ever be tested on whether your decision to change the content or the level or the sub-level of a grade, or in fact the content of a job description and how you measure stuff, you can only ever really be tested on the maturity and the logic of your decision-making process, not the decision you've taken, on the process you've used to arrive at a particular decision. So it's critically important you understand that. Job descriptions. Job descriptions are standardized and they're prepared by HR, but they're obviously done in consultation with the manager of a division. It's a description of the job. The KPIs, the key performance indicators, have to include description of measurability tools. And I've used two examples. For example, a merchandiser should have a notebook or an iPad so that every time they do a walkthrough and they need to be talking about stock levels, or they need to be talking about retiring of stock, etc., that is indicated in their notebook or on their iPad so that it can be evaluated by their supervisor or their manager. It's a measurability tool. Within the research and development division, there should be a reporting standard and a template for everything that's done within that division so that the person who's the research and development officer can be tracked and evaluated in terms of how they reach their conclusions, what their conclusions are in terms of the norms of conclusions, and the fact that they've followed a standardized process to reach those conclusions, and the template is a standardized reporting process again. So it's important that you have a measurability tool for all of your KPIs, and you can have one tool for multiple KPIs. And it's critically important then that you have a measurability scale for each of those KPIs. What you would regard as insufficient competency as opposed to highly sufficient competency on a measurability scale, which can be anything from 4 to 10 or 3 to 10 for that matter. I don't know whether there has been a discussion within the company or within the group of your measurability scales on your performance appraisals, but that should be put to bed sooner rather than later in terms of the tool you're going to use to measure your KPIs of your subordinates, and then how you're going to apply the measurability scale. Then, of course, within a job description, there has to be a provision of formalized training and CPD, which is indicated in our instance by the Promac Training Institute, and an indication of opportunities for advancement versus promotion. Advancement, more often than not, happens on a horizontal basis. We want you to be exposed to multiple jobs on your level, or at least within your band, on our grading system, so that you are multifaceted, multi-skilled. You can apply your skills and competence across multiple job areas or job titles. And promotion, opportunities for promotion, also have to be indicated in your job descriptions, where you are saying, right, after X number of years of experience and maybe X amount of training and development, both formalized and informal, we will then consider you for promotion to the following position should a position become available. Nothing is ever guaranteed in terms of either advancement or promotion in a job description, because that's not a contract creating entitlement or expectation, but you do create an aspiration via your job description. This is how you can advance within the company. I do want to say something, and this normally causes people to throw something at me when I do say it. But if there is no discussion of advancement and promotion opportunities in a job description, then you've not done your job as a manager. You've not created opportunities for aspiration, for people to aspire to be able to grow. Doesn't mean you have to satisfy that opportunity. Doesn't mean you have to even push for that opportunity to be realized, but it has to be indicated both in your job description and also in your grading system within your organization, for it to be complete systems, for them to be complete systems. So as far as performance management system is concerned for competency management, there is a lot of confusion which I've seen created generally in the marketplace. People think that a job description and KPIs is the performance management system. It's not. It's a tool of the performance management system. But a proper performance management system has 3 cycles. It has the management cycle, where you performance appraise an individual because they've received the job description and they've received an explanation of their job grade. and you give them feedback both on what they're doing well as how they need to advance. The management cycle includes a consultation between you, a manager, with the training and development a manager in the organization, or the department, the training and development department within the organization, to determine what training will be available and what CPD training will be available down the line that you expect the individual to go through. Typical management cycle is normally about 6 months, but in some instances could be as little as a quarter within some organizations that are given to what I would refer to as micromanagement, but please excuse what I just said. But generally, a performance management process happens 6 months apart. And whatever you put in terms of feedback that needs to be addressed, either by way of training and development, or by way of additional practice or additional exposure or additional time to simply reflect an understanding and to reflect the development of those competencies, is normally a 6-month process, an encapsulated 6-month process where you will come back. In a minute, I'll tell you why I say 6 months to 6 months. But the management cycle is normally around the 6-month period. On a competency issue, should management not work and you see no improvement in performance, or less than expected or less than accepted improvement in performance from the individual, you have to progress to the counseling phase. Now, counseling is in fact the first stage of discipline. A verbal or a written counseling session, and all counseling sessions should at least be documented after the fact or on a template of feedback at the end of the counseling session or during the counseling session. But the counseling session constitutes the first stage of progressive discipline within an organization. Counseling can either happen at its very earliest during the management phase when you're giving feedback, and extended counseling needs to be given while you're giving feedback, or it happens during the second phase of the performance management process, where you're now getting serious about the fact that you are gutful, that whatever you're doing to discharge your onus in getting that person to be competent, they're not getting it, they're not grasping it, they're not responding to training, they're not reflecting it in the job, in the workplace, in their department, they're letting the side down. And that's when you move to counseling. And counseling is a formalized process. It is the first stage of progressive discipline, or in fact, the second stage of progressive discipline if you're managing it properly. In fact, some people say it should be the last stage of progressive discipline before you move into the discipline cycle and dismiss. But that's really up to the culture of the organization eventually. But in counseling, you are again discharging your onus. Discharging your onus to impact on the severity of the understanding. The person is left in no two minds that you are serious, that if they don't shape up, they will be shipping out, essentially. FIFO, as they say. The counseling cycle is where you discharge your onus to unpack every aspect of what it is you're unhappy with in their performance, to unpack what you've done to try and correct that performance during the management cycle, and to unpack the fact that they remain incompetent in that particular area or that regard. That has to be documented in the counseling phase of performance management. This is the legality of performance management, by the way, in terms of the LRA. The counseling cycle, if you are counseling at the start of a 6-month process of performance management, the counseling opportunity should never be more than half of those 6 months. So we will reevaluate your performance in 3 months at a most, if not monthly, but in 3 months formally at the most. And if we're still unhappy, we reserve the right to move to a second phase of counseling with you for the rest of the performance management cycle, or in fact, to move into the discipline cycle with you. We don't have to wait till the next performance appraisal to move you into discipline on a competency issue. If you're just not getting it, if you're just not capable of getting it, or, and this is very, very important what I'm going to say now, or if you once got it and you were fine, but now you've gone off the rails for whatever reason from a competency perspective. That in fact is worse. It is aggravating that you once knew how to do the job, During the performance management cycle of that time, we accepted that you were competent to do the job, and now you've gone offline. You are no longer competent. You're proving incompetence on the same range of applications. And frankly, and I know this is going to sound harsh and uncaring, but frankly, we're not interested in the fact that there's a problem at home. Of course, we're going to make exceptions for you if we understand the nature of the problem. But if we're formalizing this process, we're not interested in those facts. We're interested in the fact that you once knew how to do the job and now you're no longer doing the job properly. We will help you with our employee assistance program from HR any way we can to overcome what's going on at home. But we separate the EAP program from what's going on in performance management about you. We will not tolerate you not doing a job, particularly if at some stage you knew how to do the job and you were reflecting competence on a daily basis. We cannot tolerate that. So either within the first 3 months of a performance management cycle or by the end of the performance management cycle of 6 months, where you should have had 2 opportunities to counsel, if you're still not doing the job, we move to discipline. And when we move to discipline, the gloves are off. Because if we move to discipline, I, as your manager, am giving up on you. And you, as the employee, have failed. You failed to prove the competence we either employed you to do or to be in the first place, or you failed to maintain that competence. And you've not responded to training, you've not responded to management, you've not responded to counseling, and therefore we move to discipline. And the purpose of discipline, by the way, is this is a final stage and a final resort before we fire you. If, as a manager, on a competency issue, I move to discipline, in consultation with HR, obviously, but I move to discipline, and in moving to discipline, I elect to give you a final written warning. I am setting a hell of a precedent for your department and for the organization as a whole. I am going beyond what I should be doing in giving you a final written warning rather than firing you, or in giving you an order of suspension for 2 or 3 months instead of firing you, which is fine. It's an alternative to firing you. But the bottom line is, if I give you a final written warning when I'm disciplining for competence, I'm saying it wasn't good enough to address it in management. It wasn't good enough to address it twice during the counseling phase, but I'm now going for a 4th opportunity to address your competence. And there's no question that HR will eventually audit performance management decisions of all managers, supervisors, team leaders, and first-line managers in the organization. And your decisions will reflect on your competency as management. That's how a hierarchy of management works in any organization, because you're setting precedents all the time. And you're very often, I would imagine, making a whip for someone like Francois's back during the process if you are setting the wrong kind of precedents. So the discipline cycle of performance management as a process is really your very last resort to air your views and then have a reason not to dismiss rather than not dismissing. And I would urge you, and Laura, I don't know if we're going to talk about this in another forum, but I would really urge you, if you do elect on competency to give a final written warning during the discipline phase, to first clarify that with HR because of the precedent you may be setting in the process. So this is the fun of performance management. This is the job every manager signs up for. The performance appraisal process, as I've said, happens at least twice a year. It normally coincides with the increase stage of the year and the bonus stage of the year. Ideally, April and May, and October and November. 6 months apart. Performance appraisals happen one-on-one. They don't happen in groups. So even if you have 50 of one job type reporting to you, the object of the exercise is to have a sufficient spread of supervisors, first-line managers, and team leaders within that group that you take those 50 and you break them down in such a way that it's manageable within your department. But performance appraisals happen one-on-one. Performance appraisals happen either during the appraisal or before the appraisal, or in fact, after the appraisal, before you give feedback, because there is consultation with the training division, the training and transformation division, where there is a facilitated process by the training and transformation administrator within that division, wherever that person sits and lies. But importantly, where training opportunities are requested by you as the person's manager and then responded to by the training department in terms of what is available as formative training, which you might have indicated hasn't been given yet, or as continuous professional development, ongoing, lifelong best practice training that can be indicated and that the person can be scheduled for at the convenience of you, the manager of that division. And so there's a job of work that needs to be done not only by yourselves in establishing that consultation, but by Carlin, who is responsible within the training and transformation department for the provision of all of these services and activities down the line. Okay. I just want to explain something, and that's what I refer to as the bell curve of recognition and reward. When you do a performance appraisal, it's very much like a bell curve, you know, and I hope you all know what a bell curve looks like, but basically it starts off on a plateau and then it starts climbing to a medium, it goes down, and then it plateaus again on the other side. Where it starts off at a plateau, in relation to performance appraisal, we refer to that as unacceptable competence beyond 2 performance appraisals. So the first performance appraisal would point it out during the feedback activity. You'd give an opportunity of 6 months for the person to improve. You'd reappraise them at the end of that 6 months. And if they remain in that first 33% space of the bell curve, that's unacceptable behavior. It's the behavior that leads to progressive discipline and dismissal. The second part of the bell curve, which is actually the bell, that's a person doing their job. And there is a range of acceptability of doing their job from, let's say, 1 to 4. 1, just doing their job. 2.5 being where they're doing their job at an acceptable level. And 4 being where they're doing their job consistently. But that's the bell of the bell-shaped curve. And the third component of the bell-shaped curve is the person who's really exceeding at their job. They're flying. They really are the person you want to have in your department. And where I talk about 33%, 33%, 33%, those percentages are what would normally come with a performance appraisal where you've decided where in that bell that person sits. The first 33% is generally referred to as a cost of living allowance. So in a practical way, let's say just for argument's sake, we're talking about a 6% bonus or a 6% increase. Let's just say 6% increase. The first 2 of the 6% increase is that first stage, which is unacceptable beyond 2 performance appraisals, where the person is only going to get 2 of 6%. Because you're regarding their behavior, their competence as unacceptable. The second is the 66% or 4 of that 6% increase, where the person is on that range of 1 to 4 for the bell. They're somewhere on that range, and they can qualify for a maximum of 66%, but ranging from 34% all the way to 66% based on how you've evaluated their performance. And the last is beyond 66%. And that's 66% to 100. But in some instances, and you'll see there, the last point on this page, can a recognition reward exceed 100%? The answer is absolutely it can. So when you say to Vaughan, what is the performance bonus? What what is the performance bonus limit this year? And he says 6%. He means 6% in total of payroll. And what that then means is that whereas you've got some people on 33%, you're entitled to take that 33% and pump it on top of the 100% for your truly exceptional high flyers, who, by the way, just from a practices perspective, should never be more than 10% of the people who report to you. Because again, that's aspirational to be there, not for everyone to be there. And this is something else eventually the HR department will regulate and monitor. How many people are you giving 100% of a bonus to, or an increase to? And then how many people are you giving more than 100% increase to? The more than 100% allows you to take that 6% total and average it out as a total budget for increases or for bonuses, based on how you're really going to reward the exceptional people within your department. But that's how the bell curve of recognition and reward works within any organization where it's applied, because you've got a proper performance management system in place, predicated by a management appraisal, counseling, and discipline. Now, obviously, it'll take a while for all of this to be in place within the organization, but this is professional management. So if one was planning a pilot, then one would say something like this. And by the way, these dates are just indicative dates. They're not necessarily the dates that will eventually apply, but they should be. By the 1st of September, the job grades for your division facilitated by HR should be complete. By the 1st of September, the job descriptions for every position under your control, not every person under your control, every position under your control. Complete the job descriptions with HR for your division facilitated by HR. There's no reason that that cannot be done by the 1st of September, because the question will always be, if you're not using a job description, one was done for you, but you're not using it, then what are you using to appraise people in your department, to give them increases and to give them bonuses, if you're not referring to job descriptions and job grades? By the 1st of October, that all of the job descriptions would have been served on the people under your control in one-on-one sessions facilitated by the training and transformation administrators. It's an administration job. Here is a calendar. When would you want to do these appraisals as the manager in the department? And when can we expect the results back from you so we can collate them for HR and for training? By the 1st of December, ideally, we would want to have completed a pilot for the first performance appraisal on this process for bonuses, which may be allocated in December. And remember, bonuses are never guaranteed. They're always at the discretion of management. You have the luxury at this stage of falling outside of the National Bargaining Council for the chemical sector, and therefore of making bonuses subject to performance appraisal and not subject to some automatic guarantee at the Bargaining Council table. Use that opportunity now, because it won't always be available. And the reality is that the minister has already indicated that at the end of 2024, he wants to extend Bargaining Council agreements to cover all non-parties. And Promac is a non-party at this moment in time. Now, it'll take him at least 5 years to extend because of consultation and opposition. But if you can assume you've got, let's say, 5 years in total to play with, we want Promac and the Promac group to have a culture of performance management and performance appraisal in place, and the performance management system in place, so that by the time there is any extension, Bargaining Council will have to accept the notion that we're not giving blanket bonuses and blanket increases, but they will all be subject to performance appraisals, because that's the system we have operating in our company. And if we apply to a Bargaining Council for that level of exemption, we've got to have it in place, and we've got to have proof that it's been operating for a number of years before any agreement's been extended by the minister. So that very much is the object of that exercise. Okay, I've said a lot, and I really apologize for possibly dumping some of the stuff on you, but it's It's what needs to be said in a lead up to implementation of a comprehensive performance appraisal process and performance management system. It might be that all of these things are in place in your department. So please don't get me wrong. This is not a judgment. This is an effort at standardization. But Carlin, what I'd like to now do is throw this open to the group for any questions or any interaction, or in fact for you to, or Laura, to make any points which need to be made as notable points as we move through this process.
Thank you very much for that and explaining the performance management system to the team. It's very much something new for the business, really, to start looking at implementing. We obviously see the benefits for the business as well, and the opportunity we've got for the next 5 years to change the culture in that specific domain, as I can say. My colleagues here, if anyone of you have got any questions, please ask. We'll obviously start the whole process starting from the 1st of August in the business. There's a few PQV documents that we try to create, implement, documents that we'll use to do performance management with, together with the organogram structure, the job description linked to that specific department's organogram structure, and then build the system from there.
Any comments?
Just from outside the sales department, obviously you've got a couple more metrics to work on other than just what it says in your job description.
Yeah.
Include the addition of the budget and or to the job description yearly. Would the job description need to change? Because obviously things change as we go along. You know, do you need to change the job description to fit the business? Or do you need to do it the other way around?
So a couple of things. First of all, any grading system and any job description should at least be evaluated annually for supplementation or for correction or remediation. So the law requires you to reevaluate your job descriptions periodically and to update them. But then again, going back to what I spoke about in terms of unilateral changes to basic conditions of employment, you have an obligation then to be consulting with the people who are going to be subject to those job descriptions or the changed grades. You have an opportunity to, and an obligation to consult with them, not negotiate. In other words, you do not need to have a discussion with them where what they say takes precedent over what you want. But you have an obligation to consult and explain why you're doing and expecting what you're expecting. I do want to take issue on one thing. There's nothing wrong with having an appendix of measurements and measurement tools and measurement scales attached to a job description. But there shouldn't be measurement instruments outside of the job description. So whatever is not in the job description must simply be added to the job description. And if it's already being applied within your department, then you don't need to have any consultation process. It's only consultation if it's a new thing you're putting into the job description. But there shouldn't be anything happening outside of the job description in terms of KPIs, in terms of deliverables, and in terms of measurables that on a standard basis you're intending to apply in your department. If you're counseling and trying to remediate the behavior, you may have supplementary or temporary additional measurement activities you want to implement. There's no issue with that. And you simply have to attach it to the individual's file. But generally, everything should be standardized into instruments that have been properly quality assured so that there's no surprises for a new incumbent, basically finding that they're subject to two instruments, a job description and then a supplementary management tool. And I know that's not what you were suggesting, but it could appear like that. So absolutely, absolutely.
And then how would you, obviously the performance appraisal going back to the salespeople and also the sales department are slightly different to those warehouses and factories and finance and all that kind of stuff. So how do you regulate that?
So a KPI for a
salesperson,
person.
department, is it on the same print?
Sorry, I didn't hear that question.
So what I was trying to say is the performance appraisal method or paperwork, how would you say it? So the actual methodology of a performance appraisal, would it be the same for everyone in the business? Or does, because we've got slightly different metrics to meet the appraisal, would it be a separate appraisal?
No. So,
Would it be
so what the law says in an instance like this is the process and the documentation should be identical, maybe with varieties between departments, but all quality assured and basically doing the same thing. So the process should be identical. The measurement scales, you have a range of measurement scales and measurement tools to apply. And the inclusion of those measurement tools and measurement scales is where you're applying your discretion as a manager. But all of those things should be standardized.
So who does that?
HR and training. So in names, it would be Laura, it would be Carlin, and it would be myself doing it with you, for you, and giving you the tool to be able to performance appraise with and the job description to be able to apply to your satisfaction, not any of our satisfaction. So you will say, the job description is deficient in the following way. I'd like to include the following measurement scales and the following tools of measurement. For example, the notebook I spoke about for a merchandiser or the template for an R&D officer. And then give HR and training and myself an opportunity to come together, develop a standardized job description for you that we're happy to give back to you. And then for you to approve for utilization. Not for HR or training to give to you and say that's what you have to use. So for you to have the final process of approval on that document and that process, that's certainly how it would work. Down the line, and down the line should not mean, and I know I'm putting my you-know-what out here, but down the line should not mean beyond July of next year. This entire thing should be automated because it's in the automation that you have the real power of the vault, of the capturing, and where you can exercise your discretion in a far more nuanced way, because you can then have drop-down menus from which to apply things, tools, scales, etc., and languages as well, by the way, down the line. And it's not a difficult thing, and there are lots of products on the market to do that, off-the-shelf products, as well as in-company products to do that. But initially, it will be a manual process, and eventually it should be an automated process. But it has to be a standardized process in answer to your question. By the way, I do need to say this. If you ever get to the labor court and the argument is made in the labor court that there is a standardized system, a quality assured system in place for documentation processes and systems in the company, and yet my manager used a handwritten or his own generated Excel spreadsheet that has never passed by the HR department within the organization and been quality assured in the process, the labor court would look upon that quite negatively, in the sense that you as a manager would not be subject to any quality control of how you're assessing and appraising your staff member in the process. So we need to make sure we're not creating a whip for our back. Carlin?
Thank you. Thanks, Anna, for that. Yeah, it's happening outside the QMS parameters, then we understand the labor law not looking into it as in favor.
Laura, can I ask you? I mean, I've said a lot here, and it looks as chilly in Cape Town, by the way, as it is in Joburg, and thank you for this bad weather. But is there anything you want to say, you know, as the HR person in the organization?
So, yeah, unfortunately, the training rooms, I can't really hear what they're saying. I got words in and out. I heard a few things that Colleen mentioned and very little that Chapman mentioned. But this is actually very exciting for us because it's brand new. We haven't had this implemented in our company before. So I think once you and Colleen and I have put our things together and start planning it going forward, and once the grading is in place, I know Kevin and managers are working hard on all of that to try and set it up that it's all works for everybody. And I think once the team gets together and we've got this all up and running, it's going to be amazing. And I'm looking forward to the start of this new journey.
Good. So Caroline, Laura and I will start engaging with the managers one-on-one, and we'll start plugging the gaps, and we'll build this system. And if we are able at all to have a performance appraisal process facilitated by the end of the year, or if it's not by the end of the year, it will be at increased time, whenever increased time is, then I think we're doing very nicely. We're doing very well from a standardization point of view and from a management point of view. We can at least distinguish between managing good and bad people and getting rid of bad people and replacing them with people who have potential. And I'm not suggesting that's what we want to do in the organization. I'm just suggesting that it gives us back our managerial discretion. Sometimes I feel that, particularly in the light of trade unionism, we lose our managerial discretion, and it's unnecessary. The law doesn't say, the labor law doesn't say a manager ever has to lose his managerial discretion, even if you have a collective bargaining situation on your hands. So thank you all so much. I will make this recording available to Caroline, and Caroline, maybe you want to distribute it to the people present, and let's just keep moving forward.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Very much. Thank you, Ava.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.